Law 5, the law of presence. All improvement begins with what is present. I personally think this might be the most important law. I don't know about y'all, but so presence actually gets tossed around a lot, I think, these days, especially now that mindfulness is becoming more popular and, there's a more broad awareness of why that's important. But when we're talking about presence in the vein of collaboration, what do we think is important for people to get about that?
Well, I think to start with, our definition of presence is awareness without prejudice. And so you'll hear that in a lot of the previous laws that we were talking about this notion of awareness. And that's why presence becomes so important and why we think it actually deserves its own law. Because again, if we go back to the definition of natural laws, it's just how humans interact with each other, that we are always present to things physically, emotionally, and cognitively. And inside of teamwork and collaboration, the ability for us to notice, Mickey said this a number of times in some of the previous laws, the ability for us to notice actually enables us all to be smarter together.
I have something to say about it in general and something about what's happening in the world right now. One of the things we say in the vitality imperative about presence is if you miss the moment, you miss the signals. That people get so distracted by their concerns about the past and their worries about the future that they don't give wholehearted attention to this moment right here. And the only moments in which we can make a difference for the future and learn from the past is the present moment. So this is the precious real estate of difference making, the present. And us being present is a challenge because there's so much that pulls for our attention. Something that I read recently that really struck me about what has this become for me even more important for executives, for leaders, for managers to seriously engage in. Gartner recently completed some research that the Wall Street Journal reported on. It says between 2017 and now, managers have an average of 3 times more direct reports over 7 years. And in their research, they say there's 2 fundamental causes. There's the ongoing thing about take out the most expensive people. So there's a whole lot of senior middle managers who've lost their jobs. But there's also the change in work that going through COVID and how much is done virtually and the use of all kinds of ways to interact that are technological that have led to people believing, well, you ought to be able to have fewer layers and more direct reports. To me, that means every moment becomes more precious. We don't have the room to squander, to waste. And when we don't give our wholehearted attention to this moment and the people who are part of this moment, we will miss opportunities to learn. We will miss signals that actually tell us whether to turn right, left, or keep going forward. So I think that each moment now has more at stake in it because there's fewer of them that we have with each of the people on our teams because there's so many more per manager or leader than there used to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, and not to mention over that period of time, the demands for your attention just generally as a human being, I think have exponentially increased, right? So, and this is not a knock at anybody, but I think almost every client, we run into something about the distraction of notifications and email and all of that just in a given workshop or meeting that we are in with those leaders, and how impossible it can feel for them to put it down or to really just give their devoted attention to a single thing. It's actually, we're totally out of practice. And so now I think it's become even more important to, well, both for your well-being, which I think is another topic, but also for being able to deliver on the value that you've promised by accepting your role in an organization. You can't possibly do that if you're not working on the presence to each moment. particularly when we go back to speed worship, which I'd love to spend just a second on what we actually mean by that, because we've referred to it a couple of times. But that while the world is so fast paced, if we move faster and faster and faster and faster without catching, is that valuable in this given moment or not, then we might be, without awareness, wasting a lot of resources, time, and energy. So that can't be good for everybody feeling purposeful, fulfilled, accomplished, aligned as a team. But what would y'all have to say about the speed worship aspect that gets in the way of presence?
Well, the speed worship, to me, as a malady, is where the impatience to get someplace is creating hurry rather than timing.
Mm.
And timing depends on presence. We mentioned it before. I think one of the most powerful questions any leader can inhabit is, what is it time for now? And to get timing, you've got to get, well, what's present? What's coming at us right now? When you really are using's the wrong word, but when you really are counting on presence as a leadership asset, you're present through the filter of purpose. So I am allowing everything that's around me right now to come to me in terms of it. How does it help or hurt what we're committed to? Which is why, as the two of you know, we call that purposeful presence. It's purposeful in two ways. One, we are being present on purpose. That presence doesn't happen accidentally. You actually have to have a conscious commitment to being here in this moment. That's one piece of purposeful presence. The other is being present in the context of a purpose. So allowing everything to come to us in terms of how it can advance forward that.
You are present to something in the speed worship.
Mm-hmm.
It just might not be what it's time for. So you're present to something in the future. You're present to something that you feel like has to happen, or some worry or anxiety about a thing, as opposed to what is actually happening right now, which is why when you say you miss the moment, when you're not present, you miss the moments, because you're so far into the future in that speed that you're not actually noticing what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that's really critical, and I said it, but might have gone a little quickly, is it's physical, emotional, and cognitive. And I think too often we go with with one or two of those. So people sometimes think presence means like I'm sitting here, we're in the room together. That's not actually necessarily what we mean. So I think we should pull this apart a little. I also think that we tend to, as humans, really go towards the cognitive. Like, particularly when we're talking about collaboration, like I'm present to what I'm thinking about. And we miss the moments of how something actually strikes us or hits us. We were in the room with an organization that we do a lot of work with. We have a lot of high regard for. And the CHRO was there, and someone said something, and he did the most sort of stunning thing. He said, "Can we just pause for a moment?" He said, "What she just said hit me in a really deep way. And I think we should just sit with what that was before we move on to the next point." And I think most of us don't do that. We breeze right past the thing. And so if somebody says something that's really meaningful or moving to them about the work, and we want to move right past it, as opposed to, wait, what does that tell us about the moment that we're in together?
Well, and I think, what presence has to do with collaboration and high value, high performance collaboration. If you aren't in a given moment and connecting to reality. So we talked about in the law of connection, it's not just about being connected to other people, it's also what's really occurring relative to what we're in together. Then if you're not present to that, then you can't employ all the smartest ways of engaging in that moment. You're not reacting, being agile to what's coming at you. And this piece about attention and like how you draw people's attention to a thing. I think also going back to the law of teamwork, when we talked about purpose, values, and goals, those are things you can have people be present to, but you have to intentionally help encourage one another, stay present to those things over time. What makes that hard is a lot of what we talked about in the last law of authenticity. So by a reaction, getting in a defensive threat threatened environment, whatever that is. Or I think, this piece about speed can also just be this anxiety. So you're living in the future rather than living in the current moment. You're acting out of a fear of what could happen or whatever detriment you want to avoid. So this emotional, cognitive, physical is really the way that you can start practicing getting back into this moment. So the noticing part, like we talked about in the last law first, what am I emotionally present to? What does that tell me? So data. What am I cognitively, what am I thinking? What thoughts are going through my head? I think this is one of those humility, personal grace, human moments of people find it really hard to meditate, for example. And it's because their brain is untrained to do that thing. So the whole don't think, that's not what it's about. It's about becoming the observer. So you can notice, where is my mind going? Because that's telling me something about what's important to me or what's distracting me or what's holding my attention. And do I want it to be there? And then physical, like you were saying about catching tension in your body, take a breath, see what that does. What do I physically need right now in order to be present in this given moment? So all of those things are things to be paying attention to. The other thing I just wanted to say quickly is that compared to bioreaction, neurologically what's going on, which I think has relevance to leadership and teamwork, is if you're in a biological reaction to threat, if you're stressed out, if you're anxious, your vision actually narrows. So you lose your peripheral vision. And I think that's just true in a broader sense, that we lose our awareness of our broader environment when we're stressed. We end up being hyper-focused on the thing we're against or the thing we're afraid of and the thing we don't want to have happen. And that has us lose connection with so much. So there's a huge cost of not being great at practicing presence.
Well, I think, as we've said, presence goes back to so many of the other laws. But when I think about its ability to actually create connection between us and enhance trust between us, I was with a group back over the summer, and the most powerful gentleman in the room at the time, we were talking about a particular topic, and he got very emotional about it, like actually got sort of teared up, and everybody in the room froze and just sat for a moment. And then everybody kind of looked at me like, deal with this. And I just took a breath and asked him, can you say what just happened for you? And that's all I did. But it just took a moment of like being, everybody else I think wanted to move right past that moment and pretend like it hadn't happened because it felt awkward or uncomfortable. I had a conversation with him about 2 months later, and he said that moment actually gave him the ability to say for himself like what was up, and that it increased for him the level of trust of the whole community because he got to say what was on his mind and not have people make up a story about what it might have been in the moment. But I think that that's what it takes, and it's anybody could have done that. But it really was a moment of bioreaction where the whole room kind of froze like, oh shit, I don't know what's happening here right now. And I think too often when we're not present, we just want to get past a thing. Mm-hmm. We want to get over it, get it done with, as opposed to sitting with something that might be a little uncomfortable. And when we talk about collaboration on the team, there are going to be moments that are uncomfortable. How do we sit inside of those?
Yeah, how do we be present sufficient to learn a thing?
Yes.
Instead of avoiding it. But I think this piece about presence is also not the rainbows, unicorns, butterflies.
That's right. That's right.
Bliss.
It's not just meditating every moment, right?
No, it's really hard. It's really hard.
And sometimes what's present, when we acknowledge it honestly, is not pleasant. Mm-hmm. So we say all improvement begins with what's present, not with what's good or what's happy. No, it's what's actually present. And one of the disciplines for me for many, many years, and y'all know I talk about this a lot, I treat walking across the threshold into a room where people are counting on us for a significant impact, like that's a big moment for me. And before I cross that threshold, I want to do a little presence audit. Like right now, what are my thoughts? Just noticing, what are the emotions? What do I feel in my body? And just noticing it instead of being at the effect of it, often it just naturally realigns with whatever that room needs from me when I go in, just naturally. Just the noticing. I want to bring that to the selfish aspect of presence. So for any of you who we are fortunate enough to have watched this or listened to this, I'd like you to think of any time in your life where you knew you were better than that. Like whatever the thing was, the meeting that you know you could have been more brilliant at, some sport you play where you know, I'm better than that. I know better than that. I am better than that. For the two of you, do you have any of these moments you can think of?
You mean like yesterday?
This morning?
Yeah, wait.
That the more present we are, the more we have natural access to the abilities that are already resident in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the ways that people actually perform better is via presence. I mean, that's why Phil Jackson was so famous for that when he was getting to 10 championship rings in the NBA. And it was a struggle for some of his team members because he worked with them all the time on them having this conscious audit of what was present for them. And I think, I know over time, that it gives you access to the highest and best of what you've already got as capability. Because distraction has our attention be on things other than what the moment's calling for from us. And our conduct is always a direct correlate to what's present. And if what's present for me just happens to be inconsistent with what I've committed to when I'm about to be in, I won't operate the highest regions of my ability. I'll be correlated with whatever the mess is that's on my mind. But often all it takes is to acknowledge it, to witness it, and it just begins to dissipate. And now I'm present in this moment with these people for this purpose.
Yeah, it loses its power over you. I think
Right.
that's the trick of your brain also is, well, if I avoid that, then it's not happening. And if you avoid it, it's still happening. You're just the victim of it.
Right.
Instead of you having that space and that opportunity to go, where's my power in relationship to this thing?
I was going to say, Mickey, back to where you started us around how busy we all are, right? And how many direct reports people have. Too often we carry the mood of the last meeting into the next meeting because what we're present to is the person that annoyed me or aggravated me or the situation from the thing that just happened. And now I'm sort of throwing that all over the group that's in the next room. And A, they didn't deserve that. B, it's also not what that moment calls for. Right? Like that moment actually calls for me to be in that moment consistent with the purpose of that team, that meeting, that conversation, as opposed to bringing with me what I was present to before. And I think that's the messiness, particularly when we talk about high performance collaboration. All of the people, when we're collaborating together, we're all coming from other meetings. We're all coming from other things that annoyed and aggravated and frustrated us. So how do we actually use purpose to get us regrounded in being present to the thing we're in right now together, not the list of ailments and grievances from the rest of our day. And like, again, being human, I think this happens a lot. Anybody who's been with us, we start lots of our meeting with what's one word, just to name how you are. For me, the big thing that's important about that is if I'm coming in annoyed or aggravated and I haven't been able to get myself over it, I want to at least name it so that everybody there knows I'm not actually annoyed or aggravated with you.
Yeah.
I'm annoyed or aggravated with my life in general, the dogs, the blah, blah, blah,
And I'm
whatever.
still shaking it off of me, so I'm
trying to
just
get
going
rid
to
of it.
name it instead of letting it.
Because I also say, I don't think most of us are very good actors. I don't think we're very good. Like if I really am present to something else and I'm just trying to convince myself I'm not, I don't think we're very good at actually covering
Most
that
of us
over.
aren't.
Most
No.
of us are not.
I'm not.
I
definitely
have
not.
zero poker face. Everybody knows exactly how I feel.
Well, I think connected to what you were saying when we talked about timing under the law of connection, what's helpful about that distinction is the ability to name, we're having this conversation so that people can be present to what's the thing we need to accomplish in this meeting or at this time relative to our goals that we're in together. And I think it's just a helpful tool to be able to locate yourself instead of collapsing everything together. And then people are, it just creates that moment to reinvigorate people's integrity around what they're talking about.
Well, as you just alluded to, in most of the things we do, virtually all of them that involve working with a team on a particular accomplishment, when we come together with them, our first move is presence. And in the beginning, people are a little dislocated by it, or what is this? And, shouldn't we be getting on with the work? And, recently, one of our colleagues and me were working with a group of people, around 30 people who are really representing hundreds and hundreds from a global company, who were related to the implementation of radical's too strong. Let's just say a really challenging change in the way work gets done in this organization. And it took us a while to get all these people identified and agree to come together because they're all too busy. And busy is the enemy of presence. If we think we're too busy to stop and take a breath and acknowledge what's present, that's the evidence of the need to stop and take a breath and acknowledge what's present. So we started that meeting by just saying, relative to our reason for coming here, which is to create sufficient support for this to actually change how work gets done. What's present for you? And we distinguished it. That's thoughts, emotions, what's present in your body. We just want to know what's there. And it took a couple people to do it, and then people got loosened up, and then everybody started doing this. As you know, one of the things we do in a group where it's 30, 40 people like that, we'll ask them to talk to one or two other people first to make the hurdle of expression lower than the whole room. And they started saying what was there. Worry, resistance, we're already overwhelmed. How are we going to create the time to learn how to do something new? Just all of this. And as people said it, you could actually witness in the room them becoming bigger than it. Because you were referring to this earlier. When you stand outside of it, you're no longer a victim of it. You're an observer of it, I think is the word you use. And that moment of observation is actually a moment of freedom. And just witnessing it, acknowledging it, telling the truth about it, we almost naturally just realign ourselves with what's actually up in the moment.
Right. Well, one thing that has a tendency to have power over, and we don't notice it a lot, that I know we wanted to touch on, is what we refer to as files. And so if the speed worship thing is the anxiety about the future, I think files are often the stories from the past that are coloring our relationship to the current moment, and they might not actually be accurate or valuable. So what's like the short version of what we would say about files?
I think it's a story that I tell myself about a person or a situation that I am not examining, and that colors exactly how I see the situation. So if I believe you're arrogant, I don't, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I can be sometimes, but
if I believe that, I'm going to find evidence of that. Yeah. And that's what I'm going to be present to in that conversation, is what are all the ways in which Emma Rose is being arrogant? Look at the way she's sitting in that chair, for God's sake.
She looks like a queen.
Right. And look at how she separated herself from us. Do you notice that? She's sitting across the room as opposed to next to us.
Power move.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, but there's lots of ways that I can reinforce that story, which means I am present to my own thoughts, my own stories, as opposed to what's actually happening in this moment. And I think, particularly when we talk about teams and collaboration, it so interferes with our ability to listen to learn, our ability to actually connect with each other and the current circumstances, all of the things that we've been talking about. And so for me, files is one of the biggest things that actually gets in the way of presence, because I'm not actually present here. I'm present someplace back there to something that happened or occurred, or a belief that I have.
Well, and just quickly, it also gets in the way of people's ability to grow. So you want other people on your team to get better in any way that's related to their personal performance. I wrote a blog like 2 years ago now, I guess now, but about if you don't actually believe they're capable of growing, what are they going to step into? So if you're constantly just holding them to this standard of a past story about them, how are they supposed to combat that?
One thing, if I have and by the way, if I have position power and I really do believe that you're arrogant, I'm also probably infecting everybody else with that.
With that
as well,
story,
right?
right?
And so that's the other way that it damages teamwork.
You know, an example of this for me is a memory that I'm really fond of because I got to meet the Blackwood family, and Lyle and Glenn Blackwood were both professional football players. Lyle had been cut by the Seattle Seahawks, so he didn't have a job. Glenn had just been drafted by the Miami Dolphins, and Don Shula was the coach. And Glenn went to Don and he asked if he would give Lyle a tryout. And he agreed to. And Lyle got there with what he called the cum file, which he said at that time, this is before all this email and everything, you brought a file that was sealed in tape that had all the assessments of your previous coaches at the previous team. And he said, Lyle told me he walked into Shula's office to meet him and meeting the great man, you know, the winningest coach in the history of pro football. And he said he handed Shula his cum file, the accumulated assessments of him. And Shula didn't even look at it. He just grabbed it and dropped it in the trash. And Lyle said, in that moment, I realized I wasn't getting a tryout. So that's a 0 to 3 second reaction. He said, Coach, but I came all this way. He said, what are you talking about? He said, well, if you don't want to give me a tryout. And he said, that has nothing to do with that. I don't want to know what's in the file. I want to know what's on the field. Do you want to go play football? They became, as people are old enough as me to remember back when the Dolphins were winning all those championships, they were called the Killer Bees, which was Nick Bonacani, who was a linebacker, and the two Blackwood brothers, who became all pros at the same time in National Football League, because there was no file as far as Shula was concerned.
Well, and Shula saying, I want to see how you are on the field is an act of being present. I want to be present to the thing that actually matters about what we're in together, which is how you play on the field, not what other people have said about how you play on the field.
And it released him to be present to his own capability in the moment. Because I think there's also something that's just very self-defeating when you feel that other people have a story about you that you're up against.
Yeah, well, because we also all have files on ourselves, which also get in the way of us being present, because I can be telling a story about I'm not sufficient, I'm not good enough, I'm not, blah, blah, blah. That also, I think, is really counterproductive to being present here, because I'm stuck in the story about myself.
Well, and talk about agility, innovation, like discovering new possibilities. If you're stuck with just what you've already known is possible, there's not the room for any of that.
You know, my last example here is Wendy Thomas, who's the CEO at SecureWorks. And I remember when she became the CEO talking about one of her most important things was she was not going to be on her phone or anything else when she was meeting people on the elevator or anyplace else. There's always people who'd known her in the company, but she was now the CEO. That was a different thing. And she said she knew from everything that we'd worked on together that when she gave her complete undivided attention to someone, that trust went up. Well, we talk about psychological safety. That's not what she said at the time. She said people's trust in me and their desire to be a part of what we're a part of all goes up. So she said, the greater our position power, the bigger chance we have for being really present with somebody to make a difference in whatever company we're leading.
So presence, the law of presence, a very important one. If you take anything away, practice presence, because it unlocks your ability to practice and see the value of all the rest of our laws. So that's presence. And next up is the law of inclusion.